My husband, right at the celebration party for his company's merger, in front of everyone he considered important, let his mistress publicly humiliate me, the lawful wife. But 3 weeks later, he was begging for mercy. Before we continue, if this story is already making it hard for you to breathe, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I see it all. Now, let me go back to the beginning. My name is Ashley, 34 years old. And the way my husband and his family see it, I am a failure. The wife who just does gardening, covered in dirt, all year round, with no real ambition to speak of. There is one thing they don't know. I am the founder and CEO of Fowle & Company, a landscape architecture firm with 47 employees, operating across 3 different states. Last year, our revenue passed $11 million. This year, my company just signed a $4.2 million contract with the city for the downtown riverfront redevelopment project. We have appeared twice in Architectural Digest. The Morrison Park project I designed won a National Design Award. But to them, I am still just the dirt-digging wife. And I have never told Julian any of that. I never talked about the money, never talked about the awards, never talked about weekly payroll or the numbers that make people suddenly look at you differently. I once had a naive belief that if I was patient enough, real enough, Julian's family would love me for who I was, not for what I owned. That maybe, given enough time, his family would see my value without a price tag attached. The truth is, they never did. Julian Whitlock is 4 years older than me, handsome, confident. He works in finance, which, in his family, means he is always right. My mother-in-law calls him her pride and joy. Every conversation, every party, every gathering revolves around Julian's achievements, Julian's deals, Julian's bright future. But when she turns to me, it's always, "Ashley still doing those planting jobs?" Not planting. I have said that more times than I can count. I am a licensed landscape architect. I design outdoor spaces, manage construction, and run a business with equipment worth more than the house the Whitlock family lives in. But those explanations were never really heard. That's sweet, dear. But when will you get a real job? Or maybe just focus on family and taking care of Julian? I have heard questions like that enough times to last a lifetime. I stopped explaining a long time ago, telling myself that some battles are simply not worth entering. Over the past year, Julian has rarely wanted me to show up anywhere connected to him. I was the embarrassing wife he tried to keep hidden at polished networking events. Until 3 weeks before this party. "I want you to come," Julian said, as if it were a favor. "This is an important evening." I hadn't even had time to respond when he continued. Faster, more decisive. "But you know, don't talk too much about your dirt-digging stuff. I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my partners." He said it lightly, the way someone reminds you to bring a jacket. I stood in the kitchen, my hand still resting on the edge of the sink, the water running steadily. In my mind flashed images of blueprints, construction sites, meetings that stretched late into the night. To Julian, all of it fit neatly into 2 words: digging dirt. I should have told him to go to the party by himself, with his pretty assistant. But I didn't. I still loved him, even though my suspicions about Olivia had been gnawing at me for a long time. Late-night texts, weekend business trips, the unfamiliar perfume on his collar, all of it like cracks in the wall of our marriage that I kept trying to patch up. I remembered the young man who once held me in the middle of a storm, promising he would always protect me. Maybe, just maybe, after this party, I would tell him everything about my work, about the assets, the company I owned, and then everything would change. So I agreed. I spent 3 days digging through my closet, trying on outfit after outfit, Not too flashy, because he would mock me for trying too hard. Not too plain, because I would be seen as someone who didn't know how to dress. In the end, it was a smooth navy blue dress, high-necked and proper, paired with the only pair of heels I could endure for more than 20 minutes without wanting to cry. When I put it on, I looked at myself in the mirror and wondered whether he would notice how hard I had tried. Whether he would look at me the way he once did, with admiration. When we were newly married, Julian still looked at me with warmth, still wrapped his arms around me from behind when I stood by the window watching the garden. He once said, "You're the only person who makes me want to come home early, Ashley." We dreamed of a house full of flowers, of children running across lush green grass that I had designed myself. Back then, he proudly told his friends that his wife was a talented architect. But then my mother-in-law began. Soft words, sharp as knives. "You deserve a wife who knows how to support your career, not someone who only knows how to plant trees." She said it laughing, like a joke, like advice. Julian didn't push back. He stayed silent. And over time, that silence turned into agreement. In recent months, he came home later and later, his suit jacket carrying a sickly sweet women's perfume. A scent I never used. His phone vibrated constantly, the screen lighting up with messages at midnight, and he would quickly flip it face down, forcing a smile. "Just work, honey." He started looking at me differently, comparing. "Have you seen Olivia? She knows how to talk." Successful women these days have to be like that. Those comments landed softly, but repeated often enough for me to understand I was being weighed. And I was losing. Olivia appeared more and more in our lives. Her name came up at meals, in work stories, even in Julian's most private complaints. "Olivia understands me." Olivia called while we were having dinner, and he stood up, went out to the balcony, and talked for an hour, laughing loudly into the night. On the morning of that party, I still woke up early like always. I made his coffee exactly the way he liked it. Black, no sugar, a little milk. I pressed his favorite gray suit perfectly smooth and hung it neatly on the rack. I trimmed a few rose branches in the small garden behind the house, arranged them in a glass vase on the dining table with a small handwritten note. "My love, today will be the greatest day of your life. I'm so proud of you, Ashley." I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my hair, imagining him holding my hand tonight as he introduced me to everyone. I had no idea that I was the one who had carefully prepared everything: the fragrant coffee, the crisp suit, the fresh flowers, for an evening where I would be publicly humiliated in front of hundreds of people by the very woman who was slowly taking my husband from me. When I walked into the ballroom that night, I genuinely had hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe Julian would introduce me properly. Maybe I would get to have a normal conversation with people who hadn't already decided I was useless. Then I looked around. And I almost laughed. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel. More precisely, the newly renovated Grand Metropolitan, with its award-winning rooftop, sustainable garden system, and custom-designed fountain. I knew every detail of this place, because my company had designed and built all of it. We finished the project 14 months ago. Next to the fountain, there was a small bronze plaque engraved with the company name, Fowl and Company. Right in the middle of the lobby, Julian had walked past it dozens of times without ever noticing. Just then, I saw my mother-in-law appear, striding straight toward Julian as if nothing else in the room existed. She hugged him for a long time. When she finally noticed me, I got a brief wave and the familiar look. "Don't cause trouble tonight." I wanted to shout at her, "I'm fine. My work is going incredibly well. I just hired 3 new project managers." But no, I wanted Julian to be the first to know. As I was quietly planning how to tell him, someone lightly tapped my shoulder. I turned and saw Olivia, Julian's personal assistant, his mistress, and as Julian introduced her to others, a potential investor. Olivia wore a tight red dress, her hair in a perfect updo, her smile sweet but her eyes sharp as knives. She looked me up and down, her smile thin as paper. Ashley, she said, just loud enough for the people around us to hear. Oh my God, you're still the same, aren't you? Still, so natural. I thought you'd try a little harder tonight. It's a big night for Julian. I forced a smile. Thanks, Olivia. You look very different. Very professional. She didn't catch the sarcasm. She never did. I just thought events like this wouldn't really suit your kind of work. What do you do again? Oh, right. Gardening, digging dirt. A few people laughed politely. The kind of laugh that agrees without thinking. Julian was standing right there, sipping his drink, smiling. No objection, no discomfort. As if the comment made perfect sense. I stood there, hearing every word, clearly feeling myself placed lower than everything else in the room, and my husband was completely comfortable with it. He pulled Olivia closer, that perfect smile glued to his face. Everyone, Julian said loudly, I'd like to introduce, this is my assistant, Olivia. She's quite funny. He paused for a beat, as if savoring the moment. And then nothing. I was completely ignored. Olivia was waiting, her confident smile glowing. She immediately launched into a monologue about her investment philosophy, while I silently calculated how many of her investment portfolios I could buy outright with my own money. The answer was most of them. Ashley. She leaned in like she was sharing a secret. I always knew you had potential. You just needed the right guidance. If you hadn't stolen Julian from me back then, I would have helped you succeed. I met Julian after you two had already broken up, and I succeeded without you, Olivia. That was the real problem. She laughed as if I had told a joke. That's always been your problem. You don't know what you could become if someone guided you properly. I was just about to ask how many partners she had to sleep with to get there when I heard my mother-in-law's voice right behind me. She was speaking to a group of women and made no effort to lower her voice. Oh, Ashley, still digging dirt to make a living. I told her to stay home and take care of her husband. The women laughed, the polite, social kind of laughter, full of agreement. I stood still, not because I was shocked, but because, for the first time, I understood a very clear truth. I had given all my love to a man who had never, even once, tried to respect me. There is one thing I learned from being looked down on. You don't argue, you don't rush, you watch, you wait, and you start noticing the things other people miss. Like the way Julian kept glancing at his phone with barely concealed panic. His smile never reached his eyes. He drained 3 glasses of champagne in the next 20 minutes. Something was wrong, and a man in the corner of the room noticed it too. He wasn't laughing. He was watching my husband with the sharp focus of a hawk spotting prey. Our eyes met across the crowd. He lifted his glass slightly toward me. I didn't know who he was yet. While 200 strangers laughed and mingled, the party went on as if nothing had happened, because to them, nothing had. Olivia's little joke was already forgotten. Just a fleeting moment of networking entertainment, but I could still feel its weight pressing against my chest. Olivia appeared beside me like a designer-clad vampire, drawn to the scent of blood. She had perfected the art of compliments that were really insults. Ashley, she murmured, her eyes sweeping me from head to toe. Couldn't find anything nicer? I mean, this is fine for you. Very practical. Olivia was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my first truck. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, if that magazine were called Women Who Marry for Money Monthly. Thank you, Olivia. I like wearing things that suit me. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice, just enough so only I could hear. Ashley, but you don't suit your husband anymore. A thin smile flickered across her lips. He had a very good time last night. I hadn't even had time to react when my mother-in-law appeared, almost instantly, as if she had been standing there all along. Ashley, she said, her voice low but firm, Julian is under a lot of pressure. You should be supporting him instead of standing here looking so unpleasant. She looked me up and down, then glanced at Olivia, her expression softening immediately. "You know," she continued, "successful men always have many work relationships. You shouldn't overthink things or be so jealous." I stood there, wedged between two women, one openly humiliating me, the other quietly legitimizing it, and Julian was parading around the room like a peacock showing off its new feathers. Even as my heart was breaking apart, I kept watching, kept paying attention. Julian's presentation about the merger was flashy but hollow. Lots of promises about growth, opportunity, the future. Very few concrete numbers. His partners, the polished, confident men and women in the room, kept exchanging glances every time Julian spoke. I knew that look. You don't build a multi-million-dollar company without learning how to read a room. And this room was reading Julian as a man trying far too hard to sell something. Then I saw him. Julian's father sat on a chair near the window, his frame so diminished that it took me a few seconds to recognize him. When had he grown so thin? He was 72, but in my memory, he had always been solid, quiet, enduring, the kind of father you believe will always be there. Now he wasn't. He looked tired, lost. The suit hung loosely on him, as if it belonged to someone else. My mother-in-law stood beside him, saying something in that sharp, hushed voice she used whenever she was displeased. He just nodded. No reaction, no questions. As if he were trying to keep up with a conversation that had already moved too fast. I stepped toward them when Julian blocked my path, his hand closing around my elbow. "Not now," he said under his breath, urgent. "Dad's fine. Don't make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," I replied. "I just want to say hello to him." Julian tilted his head, lowering his voice like an order. "I need you to go mingle. Olivia thinks you might be suitable for some of her lower-tier clients. Those little gardening jobs. It would be good for me." "I actually own a company, Julian." He didn't wait for me to finish. He waved a hand, visibly impatient. Something inside me cracked. Beyond repair. I needed air. I left the ballroom and stepped out onto the terrace. My terrace. The one my own company had designed. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine from the raised planters. A familiar fragrance from project handovers that stretched late into the night. Everything out here was my work. My vision, my achievement. And no one inside knew that. Just then, the older man I had noticed earlier stepped outside. He was tall, around 40, but he carried the calm ease of someone who had passed the stage of needing to prove anything to the world. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than my total income from my first 3 years in business combined. "The design out here is beautiful," he said, nodding toward the plant beds. "Especially the water feature, very refined." "Thank you," he smiled. "You did this, didn't you? This terrace." I recognized the style, similar to Morrison Park. I blinked. "You know Morrison Park?" "Because I read," he replied, "and because that project won the National Design Award last year." He paused, giving me a moment to catch up. "Ashley Fowle," he continued, extending his hand. "Founder of Fowle and Company. I'm Victor Langford." I shook his hand, still slightly stunned. "Should I know who you are?" "Probably not," he said lightly. "I work in investment banking. I know men like your husband, and I know his company." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" Victor looked through the glass, toward Julian, still smiling, raising glasses, working the room with a grin that was too bright, too forced. "Your husband is in trouble," Victor said quietly. "His company is under federal investigation." He paused. "Tonight's merger deal isn't a promotion, it's an exit. He's trying to jump ship before everything comes out." I felt the ground tilt beneath my feet. "That can't be..." Victor looked at me, his gaze kind but steady. "The investigation has been going on for 8 months. I have friends in the industry. The company he's about to join is buying his silence. But they don't know what I know." He stopped, then added, "And I'm guessing they don't know what you know either." What I know? Victor nodded slightly toward the ballroom, where Julian's father still sat alone by the window. His father looks very worried, confused. Is Julian helping him manage his finances? The crack inside me widened. How do you know? Because, Victor replied, I've seen this pattern too many times. When people are desperate, they take from the ones who trust them most. I remembered the night before the dinner, when I was in the living room reviewing documents, and Julian came in from the garage. He wore a wrinkled shirt, his tie loosened, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He walked over and dropped into the chair across from me, hands clasped tightly together on his knees, a gesture I had never seen from him before. His voice was low, trembling. Ashley, I need to talk to you. I set the folder down and looked straight at him. What is it? He swallowed, staring at the floor as if searching for words. I need $50,000. Just temporarily. I promise I'll pay it back within a month. He rushed on. I'm a bit stuck. Some investments didn't go as planned. If needed, I'm willing to put up our shared assets as collateral. My heart went cold when I heard shared assets. My house, my assets, everything had come from me. We shared nothing but memories. I looked at him closely. His face was pale, his eyes glossy as if he might cry. The man who once stood proudly before hundreds of people, now shrinking like a child. Let me think about it, I finally said, keeping my voice gentle. We'll talk more over dinner tomorrow, okay? He nodded quickly, stood up, and squeezed my hand. An awkward, shaky grip, the first time he had ever touched me without confidence. Thank you. You have no idea how important this is to me. I smiled. $50,000 was a large sum, but not much for me. Last night, I had already decided that when I told him the truth, I would support him with that money. I looked at my father-in-law through the glass. He had mentioned money being tight lately. I had thought it was just the market, or a few unlucky investments. But what if things were worse? He had deceived his own father, and I was the next target. Victor handed me a business card. I think you should look into this quietly, and you should also look more closely at the relationship between your husband and his assistant. I think you already sense it. Why are you helping me? He paused, as if recalling something. No one deserves betrayal. He walked away, leaving me standing on the terrace I had created, among my own work, with a cold certainty that everything I had believed about this marriage was wrong. Julian wasn't just cheating, he was a fraud, and his father might be a victim. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Victor Langford's business card sat on the nightstand like a ticking time bomb. Federal investigation. The words echoed in my head. Part of me wanted to believe it wasn't true. Julian was arrogant, yes. Cold, yes. A terrible man who had stood by while his wife was publicly humiliated in front of 200 people. Absolutely. But a criminal? Even for him, that felt too far. Then I remembered my father-in-law's face at the party, the confusion, the oversized suit, the way my mother-in-law snapped at him like a child who couldn't control himself. I have always trusted my instincts, and something was very, very wrong. At 6 a.m, I gave up on sleep and did what I always do when my mind needs to be put back in order. I drove to a job site. We were building a Japanese-style garden for a tech executive in the suburbs, and watching my teamwork always calms me. I sat in my old pickup truck, a 10-year-old Chevy, with over 200,000 miles on it, a dent still visible on the rear from the time a site manager backed into a rock. I loved that truck. It was paid off. It ran reliably. And it didn't care how much money I made, unlike certain people in my family I could name. As the morning sun rose over the site, I made a very clear decision. I was going to find the truth. The first thing I did was call Victor Langford. He picked up on the second ring, just fast enough for me to know he'd been expecting this call. I asked him to tell me everything he knew about the investigation into Julian's company. The conversation lasted 45 minutes. Victor was careful, sharing only what was already public information or what people in finance quietly whispered to each other. But it was enough. Julian's company had been falsifying its books for years, inflating profits, hiding losses, moving money around to plug holes. The Securities Commission had been tracking the case for nearly a year. Julian wasn't just facing bankruptcy, he could be facing criminal charges, but Victor was clear that he didn't know everything. The family side, personal finances, that's not my area, he said, but I know this pattern. When people like that start feeling pressure, they look for lifeboats. And usually, those lifeboats belong to the people who trust them most, parents, wives. I thanked Victor and hung up. Then I sat in the truck for another 20 minutes, watching my team place each stone exactly where it belonged, thinking about my next step. Step 1 was verification. That afternoon, I called my father-in-law, keeping my tone casual. "Dad, I'm just calling to check in. How have you been lately?" The conversation started out normal. He talked about the backyard garden, the one he still liked to tinker with, probably the reason he had always supported my work. But when I asked about the meeting with the financial advisor last month, his voice changed. "Oh, Julian took care of that. He said combining everything would be easier, more profitable too." I kept my voice light, even as alarm bells rang in my head. "So Julian has access to your accounts?" "There's a power of attorney," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Your mother said I'm old now, that complicated things are better handled by Julian. Power of attorney. A 38-year-old man with full control over the finances of a 72-year-old. I ended the call cheerfully and immediately called my lawyer. Rachel Park had been my corporate attorney for 8 years. She handled everything from contract disputes to HR issues, and she was the person I trusted most when it came to protecting my assets. When I explained my suspicions, Rachel was silent for a long time. "If what you're saying is true," she said slowly, "this could be elder financial abuse. A very serious crime. You need to be extremely careful. If you're wrong, your marriage will be permanently damaged. But if you're right," she paused. "If you're right, your husband could go to prison. But don't worry. Because of the prenup, your assets won't be affected." Rachel referred me to a financial investigator she had worked with before, Frank Moretti. I called Frank within the hour. He was blunt, dry. "Tell me what you need. I'll find it," he said. "Money, affairs, whatever the hell you want." "I think my husband is cheating, and I think he's taking money from his father," I said. "I need proof." Frank said he'd have preliminary information within 2 weeks. He warned me I might not like what he found. I told him I was ready. While Frank dug into the financial records, I did my part. I called the city appraisal office and discovered there was a new mortgage on my father-in-law's house, taken out 6 months earlier. He had lived there for 35 years, owned it outright since Julian was in high school. Now there was a $300,000 loan against it. 3 days after the party, I drove to my in-laws' house, not to confront them. I needed more evidence. I needed to see my father-in-law with my own eyes. What I saw made my blood run cold. My mother-in-law was still busy with her afternoon tea gatherings, leaving him home alone. He was much worse than he'd been at the party. He was confused about basic things, what day it was, whether he'd eaten lunch. I asked him directly about the finances. His eyes went blank. I don't really know anymore," he said. "Julian says everything's fine. He's handling it. Do you know how much is left in your retirement account?" He couldn't answer. He didn't know. He didn't even know which bank his accounts were with. I left their house that day with tears and fury in my chest. My husband had exploited his father's trust, his declining memory, his belief that family would never hurt each other. He had built his career by looking smart while other people did the real work. And now he was building an escape fund with his father's life savings. He had mortgaged a house his father didn't even understand he had signed away. 2 weeks later, Frank Moretti called back. What he found was worse than I'd imagined. Over the past year, Julian had transferred more than $340,000 from his father's accounts into his own, and some of it to Olivia. He had even cashed out the life insurance policy, the money that was supposed to go to my mother-in-law if something happened. Total amount taken, over $500,000. My father-in-law had saved carefully, lived modestly, put money aside for old age, and Julian had taken almost all of it. He and Olivia had also traveled together, hotels and trips paid for, with the very money he should have been contributing to our shared household. I closed my eyes. Every piece had finally fallen into place. The next 3 days were the most focused period of my life. I set up what I called a war room in my home office. Frank Moretti's financial reports, bank statements, property records, a timeline of every suspicious transaction Julian had made. I called Rachel, then I called Victor. Then I called a contact from 3 years ago, when my company did the landscaping for the downtown Federal Building, a man named Marcus Hale, who worked in the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. When I called and told him what I had found, there was a long silence on the other end. "Ms. Fowle," he finally said, "you understand that what you're describing is a separate crime from the one we're investigating, right? Securities fraud is one thing, but stealing from a 72-year-old man with declining cognition, that's elder financial abuse." Marcus asked me to send everything: Frank's report, bank records, the property mortgage, all of it. He promised to review it personally and get back to me within a week. True to his word, he called 6 days later. "We're very interested in pursuing this," he said. The elder abuse charges would be at the state level, but because they overlapped with a federal investigation, coordination was possible. However, it had to be handled carefully. My husband was already a person of interest in their case. If he panicked and ran, they'd lose everything. "What do you need from us?" Marcus explained that the FBI had been building a case against Julian's company for months. They had evidence of securities fraud, falsified reports, misuse of client funds. They wanted to take the key players down simultaneously to prevent anyone from destroying evidence or fleeing. My evidence of theft from his father added another layer, but it also complicated things. "We need a controlled environment," Marcus said. "A place we know he'll be. Somewhere we can coordinate with local authorities." That's when I remembered Julian boasting at the party. He was planning a family dinner at an upscale restaurant the following month, celebrating the merger with his new partners attending. "What if I told you exactly where he'll be?" I said, "on a specific night, surrounded by the people he's trying to impress." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me the details." 2 weeks later, I became the most supportive wife in the world. I sent flowers to Olivia with a note saying how happy I was for them. I even called my mother-in-law and suggested everyone get together properly to celebrate Julian's success. My mother-in-law practically melted over the phone. "Oh, Ashley, Julian will be so happy." And Julian was happy. Happy enough that he called me directly while on a business trip, something that hadn't happened in nearly a year. "Ashley, this is great," he said. "Really great. I'm glad you finally understand. This dinner is very important. His new partners would be there. He needed the family to make a good impression. You'll be on your best behavior. I promise." What I didn't mention was that Victor Langford would be attending as well. The restaurant Julian chose was called Carmichael's. White tablecloths, expensive steaks, the kind of place where they judge you if you order chicken. I had consulted on their landscaping 2 years earlier. They had a beautiful terrace garden I designed for free in exchange for a lifetime discount on their wine list. Life is about strategic investments. I coordinated the timing with Marcus. The FBI would place plainclothes agents inside the restaurant. They wouldn't make a scene. This wasn't a movie. They would wait for my signal, then approach Julian calmly and ask him to step outside. Professional, controlled, devastating. But first, I had one more preparation to make. I spent the entire weekend with my accountant reviewing my personal finances. My company was worth $12 million. Savings, investments, and personal real estate added another $3 million. By any standard, I was wealthy. I had never felt wealthy. I still drove my old truck, still wore work boots most days, still had dirt under my nails more often than not. Money had never been the goal. Building something had been the goal. Creating beauty out of raw materials and hard labor. That was what mattered. But money was about to matter a great deal, because I was going to use it to repair what Julian had destroyed. I set up a care trust for my father-in-law. I arranged to pay off the fraudulent mortgage on his house. I contacted an elder law attorney about establishing proper guardianship to prevent anyone from exploiting him again. When everything was over, my father-in-law, a decent man, would be protected, and Julian would face the consequences of his betrayal. Carmichael's was dazzling that night. Soft lighting, fresh flowers on every table, the refined murmur of elegant conversation floating through the air. I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue one I had bought for an industry awards ceremony 2 years earlier. I even put on real jewelry. Julian didn't bother to notice. "Ashley, you're here," he said as I walked in, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. "You look fine. Listen, have you thought about the mortgage?" "We'll talk after dinner," I replied. "Don't let money ruin tonight." He practically trembled with irritation, but forced a smile and reminded me, "I've been talking about this for 3 weeks." The private dining room was already filling up. The new partners from the merger company. 2 polished executives named Richard and Sandra. My mother-in-law, regal with her familiar look of disapproval. My father-in-law looked lost. And of course, Olivia was there, seated right next to Julian like the rightful hostess. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like and subscribe. Your support means so much to me and helps more people find these stories. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, back to the moment I had been waiting for. Victor Langford arrived right on time, elegant in a charcoal gray suit. He shook hands with Richard and Sandra, who clearly recognized his name and reputation. Their eyes widened. "Victor Langford?" Richard said. "I didn't know you'd be here." Victor smiled warmly. "I'm an old friend of the Fowl family." "Ashley invited me." Julian's face cycled through several colors. He had no idea I knew Victor. He certainly hadn't expected me to invite an industry heavyweight to his dinner. "Wonderful," Julian said tightly. "The more, the merrier." We took our seats. Wine was poured. Appetizers were served. Julian stood to make a toast. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, that familiar smug smile glued to his face. "This merger represents everything I've worked toward. A new chapter, a chance to prove that hard work and smart decisions are always rewarded." He gestured broadly around the table. "I'm surrounded by the most important people in my life. My beautiful wife, my wonderful mother, and new partners I know will lead us to tremendous success." He paused, looking at me. "And my wife, who is finally learning how to truly support her husband's career." Polite laughter rippled around the table. My mother-in-law beamed. My father-in-law looked confused. Olivia smiled faintly. I smiled calmly and took a sip of wine. Julian continued his self-congratulatory speech for another 5 minutes. Finally, he raised his glass. "To the future!" "To the future!" everyone echoed. That was when Victor cleared his throat. "Before we toast," he stood slowly, "I think there's something our new partners should see." He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Richard and Sandra. Julian went pale. "What is this? What are you doing?" Victor's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Preliminary audit results. The ones your new partners quietly requested last week after I suggested they take a closer look at the books." Richard opened the folder. His expression shifted from curiosity to horror in 3 seconds flat. "Julian," he said slowly, "what is this? These numbers don't match what you showed us. These discrepancies." "Errors!" Julian snapped, his voice pitching high. "Old data. The current situation is completely different. Sandra leaned over Richard's shoulder. This shows systemic falsification over 3 years. Multiple violations. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Julian, and that was when he noticed the two people who had quietly entered the private dining room. One man, one woman. Professional, calm, dressed in sharp suits that radiated federal authority. "Julian Whitlock," the man said. "I'm Agent Williams with the FBI. We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding financial fraud and misuse of funds." Julian opened his mouth and closed it again, like a fish out of water. "This is insane! I haven't done anything wrong." The female agent pulled out a document. "We also have a warrant related to elder financial abuse, specifically the unauthorized transfer of funds from the account of Mr. Edward Whitlock, your father." My father-in-law looked up when he heard his name. "What's going on, son?" My mother-in-law's face went rigid. Olivia froze completely, her champagne glass suspended mid-air. Julian spun toward me, eyes blazing. You did this!" I stood up slowly, smoothing my dress. "No, Julian, you did. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." I looked around the table, keeping my voice steady. "My husband stole over $500,000 from his father over the past 2 years. He mortgaged his father's home without clear consent. He exploited his father's trust and declining health to sustain a lavish lifestyle with his mistress while his company collapsed." I looked at my mother-in-law. "You gave him control of his father's finances because you thought he was successful. You thought I was just some dirt-digging nobody." Finally, I looked at Julian. "I own a $12 million company. I have 47 employees. I just signed a $4.2 million contract with the city. I've been featured in Architectural Digest. I won a National Design Award. And I never told you because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not what I'm worth." The room was utterly silent. "But you didn't love me," I continued. I turned to Olivia. She avoided my gaze. "You humiliated me. You belittled me. And worst of all, you planned to defraud your father and your wife." Julian's face twisted. "Ashley, please. You have to help me. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding." Agent Williams stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us now." As they led Julian out of the dining room, he turned back to look at me one last time. The mask of the successful man was completely gone. He looked small, terrified, pathetic. I didn't feel satisfaction or victory, only a deep, exhausted sadness. Olivia shot to her feet. Her chair scraped hard against the floor. She grabbed her phone, tapping frantically. "No," I heard her whisper. "No, I'm not involved. He took $300,000 from me." Then she turned away, almost running. She didn't look back. She didn't say a word to my mother-in-law. The severing happened in seconds. Fast, clean, decisive, just like the way she had entered our lives. My mother-in-law sat frozen. Her hands were clasped together. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared into the empty space in front of her, as if every support beam had been pulled from beneath the house. The rest of the family looked at one another, confused, unsure whether to stand or sit. I stood up, straightened my dress, picked up my bag. No further explanation was needed. I left the dining room with slow, steady steps. Outside, the air was cool. I took a breath, took out my phone, called a divorce lawyer. "We start immediately," I said. "Tonight." On the other end, a calm voice responded. I took notes. I nodded. The call ended. Another door opened, quietly. 3 months later, everything had settled like a river after a flood, leaving behind clear traces. Julian was formally charged, his assets frozen. I didn't follow the trial closely, only catching brief lines in the local paper that I skimmed and then closed. I used my own money earned from my own sweat and dreams, to pay off the fraudulent mortgage on my father-in-law's house, set up a private care trust for him with a caregiver, regular doctors, and quiet afternoons where he could sit peacefully in the garden. My father-in-law gradually stabilized. He was no longer as confused as before, just quietly watering his tomato plants, his hands trembling, but his eyes brighter, sometimes calling me just to say, "The weather's beautiful today, my dear. The roses are blooming." And those calls became the most precious moments of my week. My mother-in-law didn't apologize. She never was someone who said those words easily, but she began to change through brief phone calls. She admitted she had misunderstood me, not directly, but through tentative questions, through the way she lingered a little longer when I visited my father-in-law. I divorced Julian quickly, just cold signatures on paper, then moved into a new house by the river, a small space with a wide garden I designed myself, where each morning I woke to birdsong and the smell of damp soil, living true to myself, no longer bracing against contemptuous looks, focusing only on my work, on projects that brought beauty to the city, and on days of genuine freedom. Victor Langford still met me weekly for lunch. He became a mentor, introducing new clients, and his dry humor was just enough to soothe old wounds. Julian spent his entire career manipulating numbers on spreadsheets, creating nothing, building nothing, helping no one. And in the end, he lost everything. I spent my career with dirt under my nails, creating spaces that brought people joy, building something real, and in the end, I had everything that mattered. I looked down at my mud-stained boots, my calloused hands, my crew still celebrating our latest success. Some people spend so much time looking down on others that they fail to notice they're standing on quicksand themselves. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. My most compelling stories are on your screen right now. Click one now. You won't regret it. See you in the next story.